when something epic happens, something immense happens, you always presume, and indeed immediately respond as if the ramifications will be as epic. The size of the stone that is tossed into the lake determines the size and the extent of the ripples, doesn't it? But it doesn't always work like that. Something truly huge can happen, and its ramifications are not as enormous as the original event. I don't know where we are yet. Do you want to know a secret, by the way? Nobody knows. Not only does nobody know what the motivation of Donald Trump's wannabe assassin was, people pointing to the fact that he's a registered Republican voter, people also pointing to the fact that he gave a few quid to a left-leaning organisation a few years ago, most people pointing to the fact that he wouldn't be able to buy a car in America, but he wouldn't be able to buy a beer in America, but he could buy a semi-automatic weapon, although I don't think he did. Again, more stuff coming out of the details in the course of the day. It looks like he borrowed his father's gun. But nobody knows the motivation of the putative assassin. But equally, nobody actually knows what the ramifications will be. We know how big the rock that has been thrown into the lake is, but we don't know how big the ripples will be. And I was leaning towards the idea that it wouldn't have that big an effect upon American politics or upon the American election. And then two things happened. One, I guess I would file under optimism, and one I would probably file under pessimism. The first thing that happened was Donald Trump calling for or planning to make a plea for unity, claiming in an interview with the Washington Examiner that he has torn up the text of a speech that he was due to give today at the Republican National Convention, or certainly he's giving it at that convention, which would focus on Joe Biden and be more traditionally Trumpian, and give a speech instead that sought to bring unity, bring a country together, that sought to make a plea for unity. And I didn't even know how to process that. Do you know how to process that? And the likelihood that Donald Trump suddenly discovers a vocabulary and a modus operandi that he has never displayed before, either in business or in politics. The idea that the long litany of abuses of everything from disabled people to women, the appalling rhetoric regarding genuine war heroes like John McCain on his own side of the political divide. Would he suddenly, truly, as a consequence of a near-death experience, emerge entirely transformed? I find that unlikely, but that's what I mean by optimism. It's also the curse of the liberal, isn't it? Always hoping that the sun will come up tomorrow. And then the second bit of the same interview, that really sent me off down a slight. My producer Eleanor pointed it out, actually, and it really stung. It really resonated. It really landed. Before I tell you what it is, here is just a quote from the interview he's given to the Washington Examiner. The speech I was going to give on Thursday was going to be a humdinger. Had this not happened, this would have been one of the most incredible speeches, aimed mostly at the policies of Joe Biden. That second bit not in quotes. Honestly, it's going to be a whole different speech now. So he hasn't, from the sounds of that, he hasn't changed much. But the element of what this call for unity might look like, he says, this is a chance to bring the whole country, even the whole world, together. The speech will be a lot different than it would have been 2 days ago. That's optimistic, right? That would be amazing. Imagine if Donald Trump gave a speech calling for peace and unity, and possibly even compassion. But then the line about being saved by God just opened up the possibility of some sort of messianic claim emerging in the course of the next 24 or 48 hours. Because the following that he already has in America is almost impossible to categorize You can't describe the umbrella under which they all sit. The sheer numbers make it impossible to say what a typical Trump voter is. There must be something that they have in common, and we may get onto that a little later on the program. But the idea that he might use this to sort of claim a God-anointed legitimacy for a return to the White House, for those of us who don't want him to return to the White House, that I think is a possibility. That is perhaps a probability. I don't know. We shall see. I use that merely to illustrate the fact nobody knows. Nobody knows. Nobody knows why the assassination attempt was made, and nobody knows what the assassination attempt will do to the American election. There are two modes of response to something like this. There is the objective and there is the subjective. So to begin with the objective, political violence is always wrong. Political violence is always wrong, even or perhaps especially when it is directed at people who call for political violence. Those of us who recognise how awful it is, both in the in the actuality, in the execution, but also in the rhetoric that leads to it. Whether it's a breaking point poster or whether it is seeking to overturn a democratic result, the people who seem comfortable with political violence are the people who everybody must defend first when political violence is directed at them. That is literally what objectivity means. That is a fundamental foundation stone of democracy. Even people who threaten democracy deserve to be defended by the parameters of democracy. That's objective. Objectively, it doesn't matter who the subject of an assassination attempt is. You can't change your opinion about the relevance, the importance, the horror of an attempted assassination according to whether or not you like the person who is being targeted, whether that is objective. Subjectively, you can wonder about character, you can wonder about decency, you can wonder about whether or not the climate that Donald Trump and his supporters have helped to create. Alex Jones, one of Donald Trump's loudest supporters, the conspiracy theorist who claimed that the Sandy Hook school massacre was a hoax and it was perpetrated by actors. He was claiming in whatever program it is that he does now not long ago that the assassination of Donald Trump would be the best thing that could possibly happen in the interests of people who want a sort of second American revolution, who want a complete attack upon whatever you want to call it, liberalism or centrism or I don't know, peacefulness. That's on tape. I've seen that. I've watched it. Again, we don't know whether the person who tried to kill Donald Trump has seen any of that, but there are so many different, what's the word that you want here? Interpretations of what we already know, that the inevitability of trying to extrapolate from that what we think will happen next is, well, it's crystal clear, isn't it? 12 minutes after 10 is the time. The subjective, I think, includes that initial response. Or is that objective? I mean, I don't think you need me to remind you what my opinions of Donald Trump's role in the denigration of democracy on both sides of the Atlantic have been, or the dangers that a second presidency would pose to America and to American people, to many, many American people. But I found in the moment, in the nanosecond, that defiant response, which has been immortalized in a photograph that will become part of the pictorial vocabulary of 21st century history, I found that defiant response very impressive. That's what I mean by objective. You forget who it is and focus entirely on the moment. And that is the very, very recent recipient of an assassination attempt responding with his fist in the air. When he shouted fight, I don't know who he was encouraging his supporters to fight, but the defiance encapsulated in that moment was actually remarkable. It was objectively remarkable. It probably gets more remarkable, magnified, because of the power of the photograph that was taken. But still, what would you be doing? Probably you'd still be on the ground. You might still be hiding. You might be desperate to keep your face out of any sort of firing line. You'd be cowering under the jackets of your Secret Service. I don't know. but I just found objectively, whoever it had been Barack Obama, Donald Trump or Jimmy Carter, whoever it had been, I found that action remarkable. But it doesn't in any way diminish my disgust at much of what Donald Trump has done in the past and much of what he represents. So there's the objective and the subjective. And then there is the predictive, and that is where we'll start this morning. Your opinion is, to me at least, as interesting as anybody who gets paid for it. The idea that this is going to make a significant and measurable difference to American politics in general, and of course the November presidential election in particular, really intrigues me. I don't know that I buy the idea of a wobbly Trump supporter. The idea that I wasn't going to vote for him, but I am now. But then we're being intellectual rather than emotional, you know? What do you think this is going to do to American politics? That's the question I'd like you to answer first up this morning. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. I note from my inbox already let's just say, a fair degree of skepticism at the notion that he might suddenly turn into a conciliatory person. That's a great word. Thank you, Al. I'll be using that a bit. I completely agree, but you never know. Stranger things have happened. But what do you think this will do to American politics? I've got one more problem, actually, to share with you, seeing as I'm answering my question before inviting you to do the same. And when they talk about dialing down the rhetoric, when they talk about trying to almost a sort of both sidesism, that really worries me. Because what you have on the Democrat side of political discourse in America is a charge sheet. You have a long list of things that Donald Trump has said and done. And then you have a long list of things that Donald Trump's supporters have said and done, including the one who recently said that they are heading towards a second American revolution, and if the left let them, then there need not be any bloodshed. So we know that. And then on the Donald Trump supporting side of the argument, you have quite a lot of lies. You have people who believe, for example, that there was a paedophile ring operating from the basement of a pizza restaurant in New York City. You have people who believe that Hillary Clinton drinks the blood of babies. You have people who believe that the Sandy Hook massacre was some sort of hoax. People who believe that the World Economic Forum is secretly dedicated to the destruction of democracy. So when you dial down rhetoric in political discourse that often pits evidence against lies, it pits... And, you know, I almost wish I had to exaggerate here to make my point, but I don't. Because when you have a political discourse that pits facts, observable facts, against what Donald Trump's press secretary called alternative facts, but which are previously known as lies, how do you dial down that discourse? And if you do somehow dial down that discourse, does that involve the people telling the truth turning down the volume and just hoping that the people telling the lies do the same? That's when the dust settles. The big worry for me about what Joe Biden has said and what Donald Trump has said. It's almost as if both sides have to dial down the rhetoric, but one side doesn't really use rhetoric. You know, I'm talking about putting Donald Trump in the bullseye in terms of campaigning, to pretend that is in any way insightful or deliberately conjuring up militaristic images. That is obviously pathetic, but it might just be politics as usual. But the long list of lies and abuses that Donald Trump has visited upon his political opponents is of an entirely different order from the political devices that Joe Biden would use to criticize and condemn Donald Trump. So when they talk about, and I understand why they've done it, but when they talk about dialing down the rhetoric, I kind of find myself thinking that nudges us closer, perhaps, to the conflation of actual facts with alternative facts. And that's where Biden finds himself in an incredible pickle, I would argue. I suppose there's one silver lining from his point of view. The debates about his suitability for the candidacy, I suspect, will be quietened enormously now to the point of probably disappearing. or at least not appearing within the time frame necessary to make a change before the November election. So 18 minutes after 10 is the time. So there's quite a lot to get your teeth into there. And it's also important to remember that one man died. Corey Comperatore, a former fire chief who died shielding his wife and daughter. His name should be spoken. I don't know that the name of the gunman should be, but it will be. Thomas Matthew Crooks. We need to know why he did what he did with the semi-automatic rifle apparently owned by his father, and we won't be able to ask him because he was shot dead by the Secret Service. But in the context of what we know, what we do know, what do you think it's going to do?